Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining Legal Value Network's webinar, Set It and Don't Forget It, a collaborative discussion on budgeting. I am Levi Remley. I'm the Director of Pricing at Barnes & Thornburg, and I'm also a member of LVN's Education Committee. The committee is comprised of 15 individuals who have been working for months to develop a slate of 2021 educational offerings for LVN members. We are focusing the content on 3 educational tracks: innovation, pricing and LPM, and beyond the technical. Aaron, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. And I'm Aaron Boersma. I'm the pricing and analysis lead with Google Legal Ops, and I'm also co-chair of LVN's Education Committee. And we could not be more thrilled to have you along for the ride for today's webinar, Set It and Don't Forget It, a discussion on budgeting.
Yep. Aaron and I will be your co-moderators for today's webinar. And before we introduce you to the program and its panelists, let me say a few words about the organization that brings this content to you. The Legal Value Network is a growing community of more than 800 business of law professionals. LVN's board and numerous volunteers are all working together to bring its members curated content by way of webinars. The Council Luminary Series, a monthly e-newsletter, its Off the Clock podcast, and the recently published Legal Pricing and Practice Management Survey. LVN is also providing ways for this community to engage with one another through its roundtable programs, its Women's Initiative Forum, and of course through its annual conference that is set for October 6th through 8th this year. If you're not an LVN member, visit legalvaluenetwork.com and select Become a Member tab and sign up today to ensure you continue to enjoy all the offerings. And be sure to follow LVN on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Now for a few housekeeping items. First, the only video feed you're going to see is that of the presenters. Everyone is on mute except the presenters. We will record this session and it will be available on Legal Value Network soon after this event concludes. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this webinar belong solely to the panelists and moderators and do not reflect the views, thoughts, and opinions of their respective employers, organizations, committees, or any other entity beyond the panelists and moderators themselves. Questions are encouraged, so please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar to post your questions. We'll address those as they come up and as we can. And finally, before we get into the content of this webinar, we want to thank today's sponsor, Fulcrum GT. Joining us today to tell us more about Fulcrum GT is their pricing and LPM solutions lead, Kofi Mundy-Castle. Kofi will also be participating today as a panelist. So Kofi, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Levi. Hi, everyone. I'm Kofi Mundy-Castle, as Levi said. I'm from Fulcrum GT, and Fulcrum delivers an end-to-end digital legal business platform for business operations of a law firm. We develop, deploy, and support our solutions throughout and generally work side by side with our clients. I think at the heart of everything we do at Fulcrum is co-innovation and collaboration, and that is reflected in most of our solutions. So, for instance, Curo, which is our matter management solution, was developed as a co-innovation between ourselves and 2 top 10 global law firms. And Curo is very relevant to today's discussion because it's about pricing, full scoping, and budgeting of matters. So really looking forward to discussing today, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Kofi, and another big thank you to Fulcrum GT for sponsoring today. Excited to hear more about the products you offer. With that, let's get to our program titled Set It and Don't Forget It, a collaborative discussion on budgeting. You've heard the term set it and forget it, but the opposite cannot be more true for the legal pricing community. Pricing a legal matter is rarely a point in time effort. It's more of a developing an initial budget. Rather, it's an ongoing cooperative process between clients, law firms, and business partners to continue pricing a matter as the scope of work evolves. In a recent survey conducted by the Legal Value Network and the Blickstein Group, it was found that there appears to be a, quote, clear intersection for firms and clients around managing budgets and managing demand, but generally both sides, again, quote, agree that communication is poor. What arises from these 2 points is an opportunity for collaborative progress. When a complex matter arises, how can legal departments, law firms, and business partners effectively develop and maintain a matter's budget, even when significant uncertainty exists? And where do clients perceive the most value from these conversations? Today's diverse panel will walk through real-world pricing discussions and provide tactics to help you strengthen your partnerships with your counterparts by building better budgets. I'm excited to introduce you to today's panelists. I encourage you to seek out more information on these professionals via LinkedIn. In addition to Kofi from Fulcrum GT, please welcome Pieter van der Hoeven, co-founder and CEO of Clocktimizer. Before starting Clocktimizer in 2014, Pieter was an M&A lawyer at a large AmLaw 100 firm with 15 years of experience. Elizabeth Satterfield, Director of Legal Project Management and Innovation at Proskauer Rose. Prior to joining Proskauer, Elizabeth worked as a practicing attorney and as Director of Legal Project Management at another AmLaw 100 firm. And Alex Guajardo, Pricing Analytics Officer of Shell Oil. Prior to joining Shell, Alex worked in various professional roles at 3 different law firms, including AmLaw 100 firms. Thanks in advance to the 4 of you for joining and participating in today's session. And without any further delay, let's jump right into the discussion. And I want to start with you, Alex, as our client representative on this panel, to kind of set the stage for the dialogue moving forward. From your perspective, can you help us understand the differences in setting budgets and putting an overall price on a matter? Are these 2 things different, or are they one and the same?
Thanks, Levi. Hi, everyone. That's a great question. So I've been thinking of just kind of, with this whole topic, what is important, on both sides. And obviously, when we're talking about budgets, the overall budget for a legal department, a law firm, anyone, that is a big driver. Our AFAs are extremely important. We use those to minimize our risk, but also to set expectations and align on the objectives of the matter. So it's very important that all things are being considered. The expertise required for a matter is considered, the business objective of that matter. What defines success? Because if we don't agree on what defines success from the external counsel side with the clients, and we don't agree on that, then we'll never be able to come to a place where both sides are happy, right? So when you're setting your AFAs, those things must be considered, and all of that has to fall within the affordability of the matter, and think of your budget overall. If it's an unrealistic AFA and it exceeds our budgets, then obviously we're going to have issues on our side as a client.
Thanks. I couldn't agree more. I think everything you're saying there makes a lot of sense. Would you say that is it looked favorably upon when a law firm proactively reaches out to you and they're asking those kind of questions of, what are your expectations and what's your overall success? What does success look like here, and those kind of things? Are law firms looked at favorably when they ask those kind of questions?
Yeah, so I do, what we do see is the ones that are more proactive, and they're always keeping those lines of communications open regarding what is changing on a case. Things, when we set AFAs, we always think, AFAs should not be complicated. There's not 2 that are the same, but we always have some historical data to back up what we set up, what we agree upon. If the law firm sees something coming on the horizon that the attorneys in-house have not seen, it's super important that they're reaching out and saying, hey, are we still aligned on what we, is still this the main objective? Because if we're trying, and I can give you a very simple example, if we are thinking about a case that, we do not want to set precedents and there's no way we can ever, go to trial, things can change, right? And some new information can come about, and that main objective can change very quickly. But what happens is, if either side is surprised, the law firm won't be prepared and the client won't be prepared. So it's super important that we both align on that, and we have those discussions proactively and actively, right, to make sure that we're all on a realistic page. What has happened in the past is sometimes we will have unrealistic expectations of the client and think something will be much cheaper than it is. And sometimes the law firm will have unrealistic expectations of what we will pay for something. And if those discussions are not being had on a regular basis, we're not going to have a good relationship overall or a good outcome.
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting, Alex, because it seems like when we're talking about budgeting, there's so much more than just the underlying number that we're getting to there. And so this feeds into a question that I have for Liz is, me being a client, one, are clients generally setting firms up really well with the right information to put budgets in place? I mean, am I giving you all the right information to put a budget together for me? Or do you think that there's room to improve? Maybe some stories, some successes, some failures, some insight from you would be really helpful.
Sure. So short answer is increasingly yes. I think it's important to note that, as Alex alluded to, the definition of success is probably going to be different across varying clients. But what I am seeing a lot more of, and I'm so thankful for it, is a willingness to lay out what the client is looking for with more specificity and to actually tell us what it is that you're looking for. And I appreciate that, especially if you are talking to multiple firms, you can't always do a call with everyone. So to the extent that you can put it in writing, it's super helpful. And I'll give you an example from a week or two ago, where I gave thanks for client specificity because the lawyer team that we were working with, they're talkers, and we could have been on the phone for a while discussing or speculating what the client might be after. But they saved us the trouble. They, first of all, said, if you're going to send us a phrase, and they said this just straight out, if you are going to send us something that says we have a willingness to discuss creative pricing proposals, essentially don't bother. Like, we want a fee cap or a fixed fee. We're being very specific about that. And if you guys don't want to do that, then maybe we don't need to talk about this, which was great. I'd love to know who actually drafted this proposal because I thought it was pretty good. They required that the entirety of the team, all of the team members, be specifically listed. So not like these are the leads and these are, we'll find an associate. They wanted everybody laid out, which meant we have to have all of our staffing inputs. Great for us on the budgeting side. They gave us a desired deadline for when they want this matter to conclude. Gives us that time increment. And then finally, they did what was even better, which was open the door for a call. They said, if you would like to discuss this more, you want to, dive into the scope, let's talk. And that offer for a call to ask questions is so beneficial to just ensure that we're aligned. So yeah, giving thanks for that client. For us on the pricing and budgeting side, it was super helpful, and I'm increasingly seeing those types of requests, perhaps because we've got people like those on this call who understand, what it is that we need on the firm side.
Are you sure it was an hours list? Because that's exactly what it sounds like.
Quality, let's just say that.
We do push back on our attorneys to provide as much information as possible, because we do find that when you, obviously we don't want to provide, an encyclopedia of information, but the more information and the more transparent we are about not only the objective of the case, but we're looking for in terms of AFA, right? In terms of what should be included and what should be included in the pricing, and the level of expertise. We need a partner, but we also need some diversity, not only in experience, but seniority, but also in for D&I purposes. There's a lot of things, but when we're clear on those goals, then we see that the proposals that come in are, at least they're more closely close together. They're not so far off that you have someone way out on all on their own, because they have all received the same information, and the more information makes it easier and the process more efficient for all of us involved.
And I guess I have a question for both Alex and Liz here that kind of dovetails into this. When you're being asked for bids on your side, Liz, or Alex, when you're asking for soliciting bids as well, what is the role of technology play for you all? And kind of a second question to that might be for Kofi and Pieter, of where do you two see where technology partners like Fulcrum and Clocktimizer can add value in these discussions with clients and law firms?
Alex, you want to kick it off?
Well, one of the things we have seen, especially when you have a matter that has a very strict budget or very, very strict scope guidelines, the technology becomes extremely important. No one has, the capability. Right now, we're doing more with less people, less time, less everything. And if we don't leverage the technology that's available in the law firms, there's things that the law firms already have in place that they say, hey, on a monthly basis, we can provide this without adding any additional burden to them. Because what we don't want to do is ask for something that the firms cannot do and cannot provide to us. And now that we're giving them extra work that, that takes away from the actual work they need to be doing. So technology is, extremely important in our view. Data, making sure that we're utilizing the data effectively, because there's a lot of data out there, but that doesn't mean all data is good. And when we work with the law firms about what data points are important to us, and they're open to with us about what technology they have available, we have seen a lot of benefit to this.
Mhm.
So I'll kind of riff on that a little bit, that, obviously the data is really important. The classification around the related scope and assumptions that go along with those historicals also help us to put together better estimates, because we can say, we've seen how this has gone down in the past. Matters with these types of components tend to be estimated in these types of ranges, and technology that can allow us to classify matters and then also break them down into phases, activities, et cetera, to be able to pinpoint the cost drivers and communicate those to the client are really important. And then lastly, I would say, this is a bit more low tech, but visualizations, whether that's technology that can allow you to put together a timeline. I was discussing with this group that actually was a really good communication tool for another pitch that we did, where we laid out a timeline with, kind of all of the activities that we expected within this critical project, and ultimately determined by using that as a communication tool that there was some deviation from kind of what we had originally thought, and we were able to get aligned with the client by using that visualization tool to get on the same page about the timeline and expectations for the project.
And I want to jump in there. So kind of I agree on completely agree on both sides, and kind of putting my law firm hat on, because before I was at Fulcrum, I was at a couple of law firms kind of doing pricing, project management, process improvement. And I think back when I was at a law firm, one thing that really kind of was challenging for me was that kind of the systems weren't simplified, the processes weren't simplified. I think law firms a lot of the time have kind of bolted on systems and you're kind of left improvising. Like, for instance, the process of doing pricing, right? RFP comes in, suddenly you're pulling data from multiple different sources, you're consolidating in a spreadsheet, you're suddenly working to make that into kind of a pricing proposal, working with partners to kind of refine, working with BD to get in a pitch document, kind of you're having emails back and forth. And for me, it was like, okay, let's do that. Let's send this out. And then maybe 3 weeks later, if we hear back, we've won the deal. It's like, what did I do here? I've got to go back and look at my spreadsheet. I've got to go back and look at my inbox, try to piece it together. And that's not to say about what about the assumptions and the scope. It's like that can kind of get lost in translation. So then when it comes to the actual budgeting, that's probably one of the most important parts. And we don't even know where that is. So I think from a tech provider side, I think us as partners really need to try to simplify things and kind of maybe put solutions in place whereby firms can kind of capture all of the pricing kind of within the system right at the outset, so that when it comes to budgeting, it's just a click of a button to kind of automate it. So you get those updates about where you are. You kind of know how it's progressing. And that's kind of more focused on the law firm side. But for the clients, kind of when I look at kind of some of the solutions I've used in the past, it seems like the focus is always on kind of traditional metrics like hours, discounts, fees. But how about stuff which talks to the client? So, I mean, I read the LVN survey, which is really good. And kind of one of the things I really noticed was that the things that clients track versus what law firms track are completely different. There's like a massive disconnect between the two. So as solution providers, can we start to not just track discounts and fees? Can we start to track kind of diversity stats? Can we track kind of turnaround time? Can we track speed of delivery, the things that actually matter to the client? And I think once we start doing that, you're going to see like a massive improvement in the services.
Yeah, that's great, Kofi, and I love the idea of having speed of delivery as a metric. It's one of the things that we sometimes get as a question, right? Do we know how many drafts we had to turn before we actually got from initial draft to close, and those kind of things? Those are would be amazing insights to have. I do believe that in order to get back to, set it and don't forget it, if you do these analysis from a pricing perspective, and it's what we support with Clocktimizer, and I fully agree, as service providers, we need to work together with our customers to make sure that that's done in a way that customers can easily use it. right? The learning curve should not be prohibitive of using your software. I think that's, well, with someone from Google on the call, let's just say that you have a Google Pixel phone. You don't need to read the menu. I would otherwise use an example from a different tech provider, but you know, you get the gist. So from pricing to go to budgeting, what's really important, I think, is, you know, set it so that later on you can refer to it and you don't forget what you agreed on, right? So save that, you know, pricing outcome that you discussed in a way that, you know, the moment that the client says, yes, we want to do it, your next question is not, oh, yeah, remember me again, when did you send that last email that I sent you? No, you already have it in your system. And your next question is going to be a proactive one and says, okay, so we have all of this. How do you want to receive your updates, right? And I think for the benefits of the call and the people, what can you set so that people won't forget about it? And I think, you know, we've seen clients that have asked, and this would be a question to actually both you, Aaron, and Alex, what you prefer, but we've seen our customers request update being set every 10% of the total budget, right? Or every threshold of 80% every individual budget category that you've agreed on. You know, ping us when you get there. And this is where technology comes in, right? And technology exists. Well, I know for sure technology exists to do that. And another one is, you know, send me a warning when there's work identified that we thought or think is out of scope. Whether it is, that's a matter of discussion, but it's good to be aware of that there's a different type of work that you may not have anticipated. And well, these are more event-based updates or warnings, but you could also schedule them time-based. So we've seen, I think you mentioned, Alex, monthly updates. Well, also as someone who buys legal services myself, I prefer actually weekly. And you know, in sometimes of some phases of the project, you would want to have a daily, right? Because it's just, there's so much work going on. You want to see, okay, you want to be on top of it, because if you wait a week, it's going to cost you $500,000. Well, that's not the services that we buy, but you can easily imagine that it's going to cost you an amount like that if you don't have the overview. So those are things that I would say that's your first question when you talk about set it and don't forget it, is what can we set up to make sure that you're notified at the right point, at the right time, in a frequency that aligns also with your internal reporting requirements, right? If you have to report back to the GC every Monday, it would be great if on a Sunday evening you just get the overall state of things on that Sunday evening in your inbox in a format that you can share with your GC. So it's okay, well, here's the latest update. So I think that's where technology can help, and that's also how I think that, you know, setting and not forgetting what you've done is something that is particularly something that technology is helpful. But I would love to hear your thoughts on what would be triggers for you. Where do you want to get your update? Is that
I think
time frequency? Is that an event based?
Yeah, well, for us, it depends on the type of case, right? We're working on an emergency response case that moves very quickly in the first 10 days. Obviously, a monthly report's not going to work. We need to know those are the daily updates you need, you know, and what we want to make sure is, you know, that you have the right people doing the right work at the right time. Because what we don't want to do is be overpaying for certain type of work that it should never be done at a partner level, but then there's work that has to be at a partner level, and we know that. And we rely on our law firms to come back and say, look, this work has to be done by a partner. And you know, the relationship is such an important factor, because when the law firm comes to us and says that, it shouldn't be a question of, are you sure? Like, I don't want to have to ask you, are you sure? Like, I want to rely on the expertise of the law firm. But if we're working on a case that's going to take a year, right? We have some dockets that are many, many years old. I don't need a weekly update. Sometimes we don't even need monthly updates, because these are dormant dockets that only have very small spikes of activity. So I do think that, you know, and when you are looking at the data points, it's super important to determine, and when you're walking them and you're managing these matters for attorneys, it's super important that the data points that are important to them are the ones that are being reported on. So sometimes it is diversity, and we're making sure that we're hitting those diversity targets that we have here at Shell. Sometimes it's, you know, the budget, you know, are we sticking to the budget? Are we staying within it? And other times is, do we have the right people working on the right types of things? Because it could be a very large case that requires a lot of hands on deck. But the biggest thing for us is that we're paying, you know, we're paying for the right work to be done, and that what we're getting is actually what we're looking for, what we're expecting.
Alex, can I? Sorry, Aaron. I just want to ask that, Alex. Just on getting the right people, kind of at the right time. How do you identify that? How do you know kind of this requires this level of expertise? This requires more junior expertise?
Well, I think a lot of it is the type of work, and Liz mentioned this earlier. We do ask for a breakdown of the team that's going to work on a case for us, right? And every AFA, we want to see the breakout of the team. I don't need to see in a very detailed, granular level, but I do need to see percentage-wise, like who's doing what. And then when you're talking about scope, there's certain things. I mean, you're not going to send a junior associate into trial, you know, and they're not going to be the lead chair. But you're also not going to have a partner do some document review that can be done either by, you know, someone at a very, you know, at an entry level or a third party vendor, right? So those conversations have to be ongoing. You definitely set some guidelines at the beginning, and I always call them guardrails, because if you don't understand, you know, what we're expecting, then how can you even, if you don't know the expectation, how can you ever meet them or exceed them? It's always my, you know, my point of view. But, and always, you know, when you're looking at that, we're not always trying to get a lot of people have this misconception that we're trying to get the cheapest. It's not getting the cheapest, it's getting the most value and making sure that the right work, you know, and is being done by the right people. And that's super important. But it's an ongoing dialogue. It just never ends. I mean, it's a review, right? Because things change, and we understand that too.
Well, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is really interesting, and I think it brings up a question for me. And Liz, this is again coming from my sort of client hat here and thinking through. So pricing teams are really good about getting an initial price, kind of that at a point in time. Here's the scope that we know. Let's put a number around it. But oftentimes what we encounter is that pricing teams and then the teams that actually manage the matters on a day-to-day basis, whether it's LPMs or the attorneys, they're oftentimes really different people. And so I'm wondering from your perspective, one, what sort of role should pricing sort of play in the ongoing management of budgets, and what's sort of the interplay between pricing and LPM or pricing and the partners who are managing the work? What does that look like to be successful?
So speaking of things that you're always doing, constantly improving. So we actually have a bi-weekly collaboration call between pricing and LPM, making sure that that's an open dialogue and that you know, recent proposals are discussed, how we're managing matters is discussed, you know, concerns and you know, scope changes and things around staffing are also discussed. We have the real benefit of, you know, both rolling up under the CFO, which I think kind of helps from just our particular structure at Proskauer, but the pricing and LPM team kind of necessarily have to work hand in hand, both in the development of the price and kind of knowing what those key success criteria are, what the staffing expectations are. And then LPM is constantly monitoring, collaborating with the lawyer to determine, you know, what the cadence is, what the expectation is from the client. Wherever we can get kind of that further direct communication with the client on the updates, I think that's really helpful, and also gives us kind of some real-time feedback. On occasion, you are going to have to go back to the pricing team to kind of call an audible and perhaps you know, propose something midstream about, you know, the remainder of the work, depending on the nature of the matter. So close collaboration, I mean, that's probably what you expected, but I definitely think that it has to be this iterative thing where you're not just saying, okay, well, you know, you're going to have LPMs on the pricing call, or you're going to do a lessons learned. I think it has to be throughout the matters and constantly feeding information and tips to each other.
And I can tell you from our point of view, Aaron, you know, the whole set it and don't forget it. Our attorneys, once they start going, unless there's an issue with an AFA, we don't always get called back, right? And then that's when things have not gone as planned, and that happens on some cases. You know, things don't go, you know, it's just we can't see the future. They pull in the sourcing team to say, hey, we need some adjustments. We need to renegotiate this. Things have changed, and now we're about to go off the rails. Like, how do we get ahead of it? It doesn't always happen if everything's going great. You know, there's no callback. But when things start to go bad, what we always do try to do is to be more proactive than reactive. That's not always possible for everything, but it happens to work best for both sides, because what we have seen is we have been on cases that have gone way out of scope. The law firm doesn't raise the alerts on time because they're not, you know, utilizing their technology, or they're not staying up to date, or keeping our attorneys up to date. And then when they come to us and say, hey, we've gone over 100,000 over budget, well, guess what happens then? At that point, we're both going to hurt. Like, it's not going to be, we're going to hurt and make you whole. It's going to be like, why was this not raised? Why did we not have this conversation? The whole reason for an AFA is to minimize risk on both sides. But now we're having a very difficult conversation that someone's going to take a hit, and it's not going to be just one side. And so yeah, that's go ahead.
If I can add to that, because this is actually something that I saw while I was still working with the LA, but having then an overview where you can really pinpoint which area of the project has gone over, that has always allowed me to say, okay, well, we have the whole project, but what was the element that, you know, where we spend way too much time, for example, and can we do something about that particular element, either from a, you know, for a future learning, so we can make it better next time that we work together. But being able to say, hey, we have this whole range of things that we do for you. Most of them actually are right on track, but we do see this area, that's an area that's concerning us. I really do believe that is something that that helps the discussion. If you both look at the data, you both see, okay, that's the area where we need to focus. That creates, well, I like to call it a level playing field, but it's better than, oh yeah, it's 100K over. You need to know, where is it 100K over?
Right.
And I think that's where technology today can really be supportive of it and actually facilitate that discussion, also to improve the process further, in the future. And that's
we're very reasonable. Obviously, if a law firm comes to us and says, you know, these things that were not planned for, or the scope has changed, you know, we want to have those discussions. I mean, we are not in the business of shortchanging our law firms. You know, these are long, ongoing relationships, and they don't represent us for one case and then we're done, right? It's an ongoing thing. So what we want to do is, you know, let's have that conversation and say, yes, especially if you have data behind it. I mean, then, you know, the justification is there, and we are reasonable. We're not going to be like, absolutely not, this is never going to happen, or we're not going to make changes. We have seen that flexibility on both sides. It's important. But, you know, surprises are never a good thing, you know, when you're talking about a budget or an AFA, or, you know, spending money, right? That doesn't even work in my house, right? So, you know, at the end of the day, when you have those conversations, then you have, you know, you start to pinpoint where the problems are coming, or, you know, you're already seeing. I mean, we value that, and that is a big part of our relationship with our law firms. You know, we value that. We have that trust in them to say, hey, this is about to go in a different direction, and we need to have a conversation to plan for that accordingly.
And Alex, I think you touch on an interesting point, that every time when I'm participating in a call with one of our attorneys on a client call, they're so focused on the legal issues that their companies are facing, not so much the business and operational issues that might be coming up as well. So I guess taking a step back, when you're setting budgets for a matter, you know, what are some of your goals beyond, obviously, if there's a goal for the legal issue, but like, is it there a certain cadence, or, you know, why in the world do you need a budget in the first place?
Right. Well, I think we always look at the budgets that we set as, you know, they need to fall within the bigger budget, right? And obviously, without it, I look at it as a runaway train. If you have no budget, then that means somebody has a blank checkbook. And I don't know about any of you guys, but that just, you know, unless you're Elon Musk, you know, we don't have, no one has blank checks laying around. So It's just, the budget is a guideline. I always see them as the safety rails. It's what guides us as to what is covered and not covered. It protects the law firm just as much as it protects the client. It really is talking about what the law firm is providing for what price, and then what the client is expecting in return. If we had no budget and if we don't set any expectations, then when the price, when the fees start piling up and the bills are being paid, one of the two sides is going to be unhappy, and someone's goals are not going to be met. And so the budgets become something of a necessity more than just a nice to have. And I do think that not all budgets are the same, and you can't plan for everything, but at least that for this amount I am getting this. What am I? And at the bare minimum, if you think about it that way, that for this, for X dollars, I'm getting this in return from our attorneys at this level of expertise with this strategy. And that at least gives us all a sense of comfort as to, okay, now I can turn around and put it in as part of my overall legal budget, right? My attorneys can do that, because at the end of the day, our attorneys have to manage their matters. They're not managing one matter, and they have to answer to their line managers for the budget constraints that they're under as well. So there's everyone's under a certain type of pressure or drivers.
And as a follow-up to that, Alex, something I'm really curious about, Shell, obviously, really big company, has just a little bit of legal spend in a given year. Like, how do you manage those sort of conversations at scale? Then maybe second to that, to Kofi and Pieter, is what role does technology play in helping law firms have those discussions with client kind of at scale here? Yeah.
Well, we have different departments within legal, and they all have their own budgets within that, and that budget all rolls up into our legal director. So it's a big undertaking. But all of our matters are different, and our risk. We look at risk exposure. We look at many different things for all of our cases, and those cases have to be supported, and the work has to be done. But there's a value that's set within each of these cases. It goes back to the very first question you asked me, Levi, and it's just, the overall price of the matter. What is the matter worth to us? How much are we willing to pay for representation for a specific case? And we don't need the platinum package for every single case. We don't need that Ferrari for every single case. We don't need that type of representation. We don't. There's cases that can be handled internally and with a very little additional cost, and there's others that we do need external support, but also at minimal cost. And then there's the others that are looming overhead and have to be dealt with. And those are priorities, not only for how much we spend, but also where they fall within the budget. So, it's always, there's so many moving pieces that, we try to focus in on, the ones that capture the most value in the cases that are most important to us. But obviously, that is something that things just kind of roll in, and we deal with it one at a time.
And on the tech side, to kind of answer that question, I think for us it's not just about making our solution, say, a calculator or something that kind of analyzes everything. I think it's also about making our solution kind of cater to the team, so kind of contain team operations in that. So we sort of build in the law firm's governance within our solutions, so that when it comes to kind of workflow or kind of approval process, or kind of the firm kind of having oversight of all of their pricing and budgets, it's all kind of built in within there, which kind of makes it so much easier to manage, because you go to one place and it's all there. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and I second that, actually, Kofi. It's important to have that overview and to be able to see, and it's actually something that I think where technology can help, because set it and don't forget. It also means once the matter is done, to evaluate it, right? Did we meet the budget? What can we learn from it? How can we make sure that next time we do hit the budget? If you look at a certain type of AFAs, do we see that we're always getting into a squeeze if we promise that? Are we always under promising or over promising? And I think those are important analytics to run, but to be also very pragmatic as to what we see that our customers are doing is, if they work for a Shell, a Google, a Coca-Cola. What they also build client portfolios and actually make sure that if there are specific requirements that are part of the outside council guidelines, they're right there, right? There's just a note field where, you know, the most important things are available to everyone on the team. But because I can tell you, there's not a single lawyer, except for maybe the relationship manager, that's actually going to read all these OCGs. So, you know, summarizing it, and this might be also something, you know, what are, maybe, I don't know if that's the case, but you have a summary. These are the most important things of our OCG. Have them at the top so that, you know, whenever someone opens it, they have it. But I think, you know, making sure that that's shared across the team is important. Have that portfolio set. That's something where we do see that our customers are leveraging technology to keep up with the increasing demand and the use of OCGs at scale, and also budget at scale. You know, I've always said, if you really have someone, an individual, spending their entire Friday afternoon preparing updates for only a limited set of clients, that's going to be hard to scale that operation, right? So we say try to fit it in, and I think that's also what Kofi was suggesting. Try to fit in with your existing process the points where you say, okay, if we set it here, that means that further down in this process, it's just a matter of, okay, we flip the switch and go. And it's something that, you know, if the workload may increase by a little bit, but not nearly as much as when an individual would have to do it. And I think that's the mindset for people that are looking at operations. I see you, Alex, and Aaron smiling as legal ops people. You know, this is what we do, right? So I think that's an important one. And I think it's also, go ahead, Aaron. I'll finish my other thought later.
Well, so a couple of things. One, if anyone that's listening in on this panel has any questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. But I think, you know, as a follow-up to Peter, what you've mentioned, it seems like when we're talking about the role of technology in budgeting, it's really to sort of enable and facilitate the types of conversations that we really want to have and that we want to have consistency. It's not about necessarily doing these big new things, but sort of streamlining our core competencies in a way that allows us to sort of manage the intangibles and understand those and sort of contextualize those with data. And so sort of as a follow-up to that, Liz, something I'm interested to hear from you is, one, just how can we start communicating a little better? I mean, what does that look like for us as a law firm and a client to have the right conversations around budget, around budgeting? And maybe for someone who's maybe not having these conversations today, what should they be doing?
So there's a lot there, and I did kind of crowdsource my team in terms of some of the kind of keys to the game, so to speak. So one thing that's kind of close to my heart, and I think probably you know, kind of implicates Kofi and Pieter's type solutions, is you got about 60% of the world that is visual learners. And I think sometimes it helps to illustrate a story by having visualized data. People love donut graphs, people love, you know, stuff like that. I think sometimes you can really see whether it's overtime, whether it's, you know, the leverage ratios, whether it's, you know, whatever sorts of KPIs you're either discussing with the client, or if you're trying to explain an out of scope activity. I think sometimes having an illustration to your narrative is actually really helpful. And that's something that has actually been really useful for us in internal conversations with lawyers to try to help them to articulate to the client, you know, when you have that conversation about scope changing or explaining that, you know, we're getting ready to go over budget and why. I think in terms of how those conversations can go best, you know, communicate early. As soon as you have the indication, alerts are great, but I think you have to not delay to dig in and really research what happened. Technology is going to help you get those answers a little bit faster. But, you know, if the factors are unavoidable, let's say, you know, we tried to block an apex deposition and it happened anyway, you know, talk about the value of what that delivered in terms of the deposition went well. We were able to handle that. This is the cost that occurred, but overall, that was not a significant departure. It was really something that was never anticipated in the initial scope. So be prepared when you have that conversation. So start early, be prepared with all of that information to be able to answer the why. And then you kind of got to have a solution. If you're resetting the stage, if you're calling this audible, I've got a lot of sports analogies today, then where are we headed from this point? How are we going to avoid any overages in the future? Do we see any risk factors in the future that we want to go ahead and call to our clients' attention? And then finally, if it's something where we're really not going to be able to adjust the budget, because as Alex has alluded, sometimes that's set, it's approved at a higher level than the folks that we're dealing with. I think it's still really useful to show the additional value that was delivered, even if it's something that's going to ultimately become a write-off in this instance. Because what you're showing is investment in the relationship, and perhaps the next opportunity you have to work with them, you're able to value the time that you invested in the relationship. And I think just finally understanding that context within which the budget discussion is happening. Are they setting forecasts quarterly? Is it more important to actually hit the number or to be able to forecast accurately? Is there a PO system that you need to be adding in additional time to get approvals for any change control? All of those things are things that you need to be aware of. And if you come prepared to that conversation with all of those components, I think you will have a successful outcome. Not to mention, just coming prepared to a call shows that you care about the relationship, period, right? Ready to answer those questions.
And we can tell the difference, by the way. We can tell when the teams on the other side are prepared or not prepared based on the information they're providing ahead before we were even asking the questions. And when it does come to, valuing the relationship, as you made a great point, we do value that. We do, we know that sometimes our firms take a hit and, because things, they underestimated something and still fell within scope. We don't want that to be the case all the time, obviously. We don't want that to be the norm. So what we do is, if there is a new RFP and this firm has handled these type of cases multiple times, it's good for them to add, in the last 3 cases, this is, some of those data points, because then that justifies kind of where their proposal is coming from. And we can say they didn't just shoot, a dart in the dark and come up with this number. Like this number, there's some validity to it. And that's why these numbers are justifiable. And so, utilizing the data in that way is super important. I mean, at times we'll pay a premium, depending on obviously the type of work that's being done. We understand that. And one of the things that's big for us is always, scope. We always go back to scope. And our team, we don't always push down on price. This is going to be the very, unpopular answer. It's not always about the price. It's about the work that's supposed to be done and the scope that's included in that price. And, making sure that, we are asking the attorneys on the other side, can you provide this? And is this a realistic expectation? I've had firms come in so low on bids that I actually go back and say, can you really do it at this price? And when you start pushing on what's going to be delivered, if it's not a realistic number, why would we even agree to it? It could look great for us, but why would we agree to that? So it's those conversations and preparing for those and making sure that we're all, we're talking in realistic, figures and numbers is super important for us too.
Alex, you mentioned something that I want to kind of take it and spin it a little bit, maybe back to Kofi and Pieter, about how when clients come to you and say, a matter might be within this range, and just giving some data points for context of where a typical case might be. I'm curious to hear from Kofi and Pieter's perspectives of, are you hearing more of your clients, asking for, client-ready deliverables that could be, okay, Barnes and Thornburg's putting together a package, but they also may be wanting to put together something else to accompany their package, just to validate, what they're providing to their clients like Shell?
For me, I think, yes, in my experience, clients are asking for those. And then in terms of process improvements, clients are definitely asking for those too. But from kind of my point of view, I think deliverables are nice. And they do help kind of facilitate the conversation. But maybe a bit more focus should be on kind of maintaining that relationship and kind of understanding what the firm can do in particular for that client in particular. Because you can put together kind of a shiny output, and I mean, at Fulcrum, we can shoot out shiny outputs and you can put that in front of a client, but kind of how do you use that to differentiate yourself from the competition? Because I think, yeah, you can have kind of numbers and you can break down stuff in terms of hours and fees, but how do you quantify what your firm offers? And I think maybe as solution providers, we need to start working with law firms to help kind of demonstrate that differentiation. Because how do you quantify a reputation? Kind of, it's quite challenging, and I just think client deliverables are nice, but there's maybe a bit more of a step we could take to do that. Probably different opinions on that, but yeah, keen to hear.
I love it. It would not have been the thing that I would have come up with. So it's great to hear different perspectives. I love the data. You know, I would always say, you know, bring the data to the table and let it speak. And you know, the data will facilitate the conversation, and the data will also, but to your point, having that data available will also help you back up, and lawyers love it, right? They want to have evidence. We probably all want to have evidence of why are you so good at this. And if you can say, well, actually, I've looked at our data, and for this particular type of work, here are our 10 high profile or maybe not so high profile cases, depends on the type of work that we've done. And you know, actually, here's some of the work that we've done for you, clients, and within our different offices across the globe, if that's an international matter. And I think that's helping to paint a picture. And I think it's a valid point, right? Well, how do you differentiate? But being able to back it up with data would always be my initial thing. And if you can visualize that, that is super powerful. Last point here as well is with those visualizations, I don't think, and I've heard too often, I think, from customers that they are not afraid, but they're a little bit anxious for starting the conversation. And there's always the thought that, yeah, you know, we need to price really low, but they don't. If we put all of this, if we put the scope on the table, you know, they're going to think that that we're trying to fleece them somehow. But I'd say, you know, put the scope on the table and then have that discussion. And I think to your point, Alex, and it's actually funny, we had a conversation, we had a webinar that we organized a couple of weeks ago where we had a senior vice president from Dell talking. He made exactly the same point. He said, you know, we're here because we actually want our law firms to do more work because they will get better. They will understand us better. So we are willing to have that conversation. And I think that's a hurdle that I often see with customers, that they don't dare to have that conversation, while I think most clients are open for it and actually eager to have that conversation. I mean, let me not speak for you, but that's what I hear from clients that we speak with, that we invite to panels, and it's actually, you know, what we hear tonight as well, or this morning as well. So that was my last point. But I think, you know, the data to support the story that you're telling, and that story can be as compelling as here's why we're so good at what we do, would always be my angle. You're muted, Alex.
Sorry. Yeah, not all of our firms have the team, the LPM teams or the pricing teams. It doesn't have to be super complicated. One of our firms actually gives us a very straightforward one-page LPM report that our attorneys love, because it shows actuals against budget. It shows who's working on what. You know, not a very detailed, but it's just like the summary, some visualization with a little bit of graphs involved. And that seems to fit the bill for quite a bit of our, our matters in that group. So it doesn't have to be something super complicated. It's just really is just giving those answers or providing those answers to the client. And that way we're all looking at the same thing. You know, KPIs, that word gets thrown around all the time. But they're not all important. Obviously, they're all called key performance indicators, but are they all important to me? Probably not. So I think it's important for us to have that discussion as to, which data is important and which data makes sense for the cases that the law firms are working on for us.
This is great, and we're getting up close to the hour, and so I kind of have one final question, and this is really for the entire group. So anybody feel free to sort of jump in here, because the common thing that we've talked about is, yes, there's numbers that we're passing back and forth, but it's all in terms of whatever the context is of the matter, and it's how can we make sure that whatever the story is around whatever matter a firm's handling, that's being told in a way that's effective. And I think that's done through really close collaborations and key relationships. And I think LVN can certainly play a really good role in that, of really getting to know your peers on both sides of the table. And so would love to kind of ask this to the group of, would love for you to share a bit about kind of the importance of involvement in groups like this in LVN to make sure that we're always sort of looking forward of how can we do better. Granted, I recognize that that's really open-ended, but I think this community also is meant for really open-ended conversations. So I'll send that to you guys.
Liz, you want to kick it off?
Liz, yeah.
2 points there that I think, kind of respond to current companies. So probably some of the best ideas or the most successful ideas that I have around, how our team can serve our lawyers and our clients better come from informal conversations that I have with in-house colleagues, folks I went to law school with who are now in AGC or GC positions, folks who are in legal operations, folks who are my contemporaries. Similarly, I think a lot of the vendors that we work with, and I'm sure Kofi and Pieter are no exception. I know for a fact that Pieter is, are seeking input from their clients. Mm-hmm. How can we make our tools meet your needs? How can we keep abreast of the business challenges that you have? I think that, having these kind of client user groups and then collaborating over, the LVN network, I think can really bring value to everybody. So those two things I think are really important, and I think this organization, provides those opportunities for us.
Well, and I think the more conversations we have regarding what we're doing internally in different roles, right? I was on the law firm side for a very long time. Now I'm on the client side. It's good to know what is ailing us as collectively, right? Because we're all trying to do the best we can. And as the legal ops roles grow, and obviously we want to be as transparent as possible as we can within our own limits, but having these conversations, having this legal value network enables us to connect with people that are looking for how to best do what they are doing now and how to think for the future. So it's been a really helpful being a member of something like this has been really helpful, for at least for me, because then we can't always say, hey, we're this company and we're fabulous at everything we do. I mean, we can say it, but that's not always the case. It's good to exchange ideas and see what's working in another place, because we're all at different levels of maturity.
No, I totally agree with both viewpoints. I think, as I said at the beginning, Fulcrum's all about collaboration and co-innovation. So obviously, Pieter, I probably won't be doing a co-innovation with you, but it's really good to hear everyone's views. And yeah, I really enjoy being part of the group.
Yeah, and I would even go as far as to say, why not, right? It's ultimately, yeah, people make their own decisions in the end. But I think actually the fact that we're participating in this together, I think, is a great example of how that conversation, having that discussion and not actually siloing it, oh, that's my product, oh, that's your product, but having that conversation, and then we take away from the conversation what we think fits our product philosophy best. And that can be that you will have different takeaways from this conversation than I will have, and that's great. And there's something to choose, which is good. I really think, as my last point, I think having this conversation, having both, and that's what I love about LVN, having both the law firm side and the client side in the same room, and actually even bring Kofi and me in. I mean, awesome. But I think that is really that's really what drives new ideas. I made a ton of notes here, and because we have this conversation with people from all sides, and it's only together that we make things better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on all of these points. And maybe as a takeaway for everybody here that's on this call and listening in on this panel is, as next steps, have those conversations. When you're having those, casual conversations, whether it's with your clients, whether it's with your outside counsel, if you're in legal ops, be willing to exchange ideas. A rising tide sort of lifts all boats here. And we're excited about more conversations like this certainly to come. And with that, we're going to wrap up this session. So thank you again to our speakers, Pieter, Liz, Alex, Kofi. This was very informative and very well done. I know I got a ton out of this. And thank you to our attendees today. And as a reminder, there is a brief survey that will be available to you after this webinar closes. So to take that survey, please follow the prompt that'll appear when the webinar closes. We'll also email that to you within the next few days. We really just appreciate the time that you're taking to join us today, and even in taking the survey, which gives us the ability to provide more informative webinars like this. So with that, we'll sign off here and have a great day, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.